We're going to get a debate, it looks like, or at least one. Donald Trump is saying he'd be willing to debate Kamala Harris more than once. We can put C1 up on the screen. On a call with reporters, former President Trump says he will commit to debating Vice President Harris, but is not thrilled with ABC as debate host. Said he'd be willing to do more than one debate as well. Let's see, who would ABC be? That would be Stephanopoulos.
It could be Stephanopoulos unless I think they've kept him out of debate moderating before because of that, but it may have been just a pure Republican debate moderating that they've replaced him with Margaret Brennan.
Yeah. So how do you think Trump would do against Kamala Harris?
She is a Ted Cruz type. Or Margaret Brennan's on CBS, so I take that back. But I think she's a Ted Cruz type.
I'm going to disagree with this, but I want to hear your argument.
Ted Cruz type in a very generic sense, not in a specific sense, but in a generic sense, which is that she is a talented, she was at one point a talented politician. She was until she became vice president, and there was a camera on her all of the time, and she sounded insane. But she's sort of talented on paper, has the right education, the right political career, and can talk about the issues, et cetera. It doesn't matter when you're up against Donald Trump. She's just a generic politician, and Donald Trump eats generic politicians for lunch. You can be Hillary Clinton, whatever. Joe Biden is a pretty generic politician, but he's kind of got a folksier part of him, for what it's worth, that he always at least pretended to have these populist, folksy instincts in a way that Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Chris Christie, they just could never pull it off. And so Donald Trump will eat you for lunch if you're like that.
So the reason I say I disagree is that Ted Cruz is a meticulous prep guy.
And Kamala Harris isn't.
He's gonna have all his lines memorized. Mm-hmm. He's gonna have all his arguments laid out. He's a debate bro. Mm-hmm. He loves to debate. He loves to pick out what somebody said, challenge them, and he has a really thorough kind of, maybe surface level, but thorough surface level grasp on issues, such that he can talk about them long enough to sound educated and eloquent throughout the length of a debate. If you had to go for days with actual policy experts, then obviously he's going to fall apart. But no politician really has to do that in public. So whereas Kamala Harris is much more of a kind of riffer and an off-the-cuff person who has phrases that she goes back to.
Sure.
As kind of crutches.
Well, that's what happened with Marco. And I guess it was Chris Christie, because Trump wasn't at that debate.
Right.
Trump would have, let's be real, Trump would have had a field day with that too.
Now, the reason I think that it could be an interesting debate is that Harris is at her worst when somebody is pressing her directly on a vulnerability that she should be prepared to respond to, but she isn't. And that Trump just doesn't do that, because Trump is all about himself in the debate and exuding his own kind of self. That's him. He doesn't tactically kind of try to pin somebody down. Instead, he uses his own buzzwords. He'll say laptop,
wrong,
Hunter, wrong, and you have to kind of be in the mix of his train of thought to understand what he's saying, and which means that whoever he's saying it to doesn't have to respond directly to anything, because Trump doesn't say anything directly. Trump just kind of throws a whole bunch of stuff against the wall.
Which is why nobody can compete with him.
But at the same time, he'll have a hard time exposing Harris's big vulnerability. Because he'll just say he'll say border, chaos,
energy, ban fracking,
immigrants raping people, and by the end of his answer, it will be very clear what Trump is trying to say. But he won't be, but it'll be so out there that it will let Harris off the hook so that she can just give a speech about immigration or something.
Say what you will about Joe Biden, at least when he's, conscious, he is a charismatic politician, and he always has been. That's actually something that's to his credit.
Yeah,
he's able to
riff.
he can riff, and sometimes he really shouldn't riff, but he does. Like when he talked about 7-Elevens in his state in an interview, which if you haven't seen, go ahead and look up Joe Biden 7-Elevens.
Very Trumpian.
Yes, very Trumpian moment, circa like 2007. But he's charismatic. Hillary Clinton is not charismatic. Kamala Harris is not charismatic. Both of them try very hard to be, though, and that I see standing up to Trump very poorly just because he is so absurdly charismatic that he just drowns it out.
I think I mean, maybe it depends on and it's subjective, but I kind of feel like she does have some charisma. Certainly
Really?
personally.
Cringeما.
Like
I tried to make that word.
Like in
charismatic.
person, she does exude a charisma.
Oh, and I've never talked to her.
Despite, and maybe it doesn't come through on the screen. I kind of think it does. I think it kind of is evaporated by like the looping sentences where you start to like get really worried for her. Like you're following the sentence. You're like, oh God, where is this going to go? And is she stuck in the loop, talking about time or whatever else, and just hoping that she can find her way out of this loop? And so then you forget that there is some charisma there.
Well, it's interesting because I remember covering her Senate campaign and thinking, I actually was pretty impressed with her as a politician because the Los Angeles Times back then had gone with her to a fundraiser, and she was, in front of this room of California Democrats, pushing them. It became her 3 a.m. policy or whatever, but at the time she was like, listen, the identity politics stuff is not what people are thinking about when they're laying awake at 3 a.m. worrying about their families. And this was, 2018, something like that. It was a pretty brave thing to say in a room full of California progressives back then. And I remember thinking, you actually might have something. Like you have to have charisma, I feel like, to be making points like that. So it just seems that being vice president totally broke her brain. I thought she had charisma in those Senate judiciary hearings. She was going viral all the time for those,
right.
Even though I completely disagreed with her most of the time. She was going viral.
She handled it well.
Yeah, but it's like being vice president just caused her to melt.
Or running for president too.
That's true. Yeah. Right. She had a lot. Charisma didn't necessarily come through during those debates. And last thing I'll say, by the way, is Trump in this call with reporters that was mentioned in the element we put up on the screen. He said that he absolutely, that was his quote, absolutely thinks he should be debating Harris. He said multiple times, you mentioned that earlier, and he said he thinks that people have, quote, an obligation to debate, which was on the table before he agreed to these debates, whether or not either candidate felt obliged to stand on the stage and debate one another. I think because of what happened with Joe Biden, I pray that we were approaching this norm of no debates for primaries or whatever. People were saying, it doesn't really matter. Trump skipped a debate. It was becoming more and more of a talking point. I pray that this has finally disabused us of the notion that it is okay to forego debates, because if Joe Biden had to debate in the primary, where he did have serious opponents, he would have crumbled, and we could have done all of this earlier.
And the irony is that if Trump had refused to debate him, and the first debate wasn't until September, by then it would have been too late for Joe Biden to drop off the ticket, and he would have lost in a Mondale-level landslide. So Trump, by accepting the debate, put the whole thing at risk, put his whole campaign at risk.
Sure did.
Yeah.
He also said he thinks it'll be, quote, no different debating Kamala Harris than it would Joe Biden in, again, that
because
call.
Trump doesn't care who he's debating. He's just himself.
Right, and it gets to the point you were making earlier in the show that, you can turn Biden migrant crime into Harris migrant crime or Bidenflation into Harrisflation. That's something Republicans are really banking on at this point because they have spent months preparing the case against Joe Biden, and almost before the convention, right at the end of the road, they had the rug pulled out from under them. Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.